All right, so get those taste buds ready. We are diving deep into Argentina's wine scene today, specifically the Luján de Cuyo region.
A region that's really making waves in the wine world.
Exactly. And, I've always been curious about Argentine wines, particularly their Malbecs. I've heard so much about the unique flavors coming out of Luján de Cuyo, so I'm ready to get the full download.
Well, you came to the right place. We've got a mountain of research here,
Hmm.
historical accounts, deep dives into the terroir, which basically means how the region's climate, soil, and altitude affect the grapes, grape variety breakdowns, even sommeliers take on the wines. We'll extract all the good stuff so you can walk away feeling like a Luján de Cuyo pro.
Love it. So before we get into specific wineries and tasting notes, let's start with the basics. Where does Luján de Cuyo fit into the overall picture of Argentinian wine?
Think of Mendoza, right at the foot of the Andes Mountains. That's where you'll find Luján de Cuyo. It's actually one of the oldest wine regions in Argentina, dating back to the late 1800s.
Wait, so not the Spanish conquistadors who brought vines over in the 1500s. I thought that was the start of it all.
It was, but for centuries, it was all about quantity over quality,
Mm.
mostly using the Criolla grape for simple table wines. But Luján de Cuyo is where things really shifted. European immigrants, mainly Italians and Spanish, arrived with their own winemaking traditions. They saw the potential of this region, high-altitude vineyards, unique soils, to create something truly special.
So they were the real pioneers, bringing those classic European grapes like Malbec and Cabernet Sauvignon to this new world.
And that's a perfect segue to terroir, the magic combination of elements that makes each wine region unique.
Hmm.
In Luján de Cuyo, altitude is key. We're talking vineyards 800 to 1,200 meters above sea level, nestled right against the Andes.
Wow, that's high. I imagine that must have a huge impact on the grape.
It absolutely does. First off, the sunlight is intense at that altitude, which means more concentrated flavors in the grapes. But then you have these cool nights thanks to the mountain air, and that preserves acidity.
I've heard that acidity is important in wine, but I've never fully understood why. Could you break it down for me?
Think of it like the backbone of the wine. Acidity gives it structure, vibrancy, and that refreshing quality that makes you want to take another sip. It also helps wines age gracefully.
Makes sense. So we've got intense sun, cool nights, high altitude. What about the soil? Is it all Rocky Mountain terrain?
Actually, there's a surprising variety of soils in Luján de Cuyo. You've got alluvial soils, which are basically fertile river deposits, and stony soils higher up the slopes. There's even some clay in the mix. This diversity means you get different styles of wine even within this one region.
Okay, so we're painting a picture here. Dramatic mountain landscape, vineyards clinging to the slopes, and this interesting mix of soils. What about the climate itself? I've always pictured Argentina as being pretty dry.
You're right, it is dry, a desert-like climate with tons of sunshine, which is perfect for ripening grapes. But it's so dry, they absolutely need irrigation. Our research actually highlighted how Luján de Cuyo winemakers are leading the way in sustainable water management, using drip irrigation and tapping into snowmelt from the Andes.
That's fascinating. So they're not just making great wine, they're also thinking about the long-term health of the environment.
Exactly, it's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
But all these elements,
Mm.
the altitude, the climate, the soils, come together to create a terroir that's perfectly suited for certain grape varieties, and none more so than Malbec.
Now, we can't talk about Luján de Cuyo without talking about Malbec, right? It's
Mm.
practically synonymous with Argentine wine. What is it about this grape that makes it thrive in this region?
It's a bit of a Cinderella story, actually. Malbec originated in France, but it never really found its footing there. In Luján de Cuyo, it's like it finally came home. The combination of intense sunlight, cool nights, and those well-drained soils allows Malbec to reach its full potential.
So if I were to pour myself a glass of Luján de Cuyo Malbec right now, what would I be tasting?
Picture this: a deep, almost inky purple color. On the nose, you'd get those classic Malbec aromas: black plum, blackberry, maybe some violets, and a hint of spice. And the taste, it's where Luján de Cuyo Malbecs really shine. Full-bodied, but with a freshness and vibrancy that elevates it beyond your typical Malbec. The tannins, that dryness you feel on your tongue, are smooth, and the finish lingers.
It's interesting. I find that Luján de Cuyo Malbecs often have this really distinct savory note alongside the fruit, almost like a hint of cured meat or leather. Have you noticed that too?
Absolutely. It's that complexity that makes them so intriguing. And a lot of it comes down to the winemaking techniques. You have both traditional producers who are using old school methods, and then these innovative wineries experimenting with new approaches.
Okay, before we get lost in the nuances of winemaking, I have to ask the important question. What are we pairing this Malbec with? I'm thinking a juicy Argentinian steak, right?
Of course. A classic asado is a match made in heaven for a Luján de Cuyo Malbec. But honestly, the versatility of these wines is amazing. You could go with grilled lamb, hearty stews, even a mushroom risotto.
So it's not just a one-trick pony for red meat lovers?
Not at all. There's a whole spectrum of styles, from lighter, more elegant Malbecs that would pair beautifully with poultry or even fish, to those big, bold ones that can stand up to the richest dishes.
All right, you've convinced me. Malbec is definitely on the menu tonight. But now I'm curious, what about other grapes? Is Luján de Cuyo a one Malbec show?
It's true that Malbec is the star, but there's a whole supporting cast of grapes that are worth exploring. Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, for example, both do exceptionally well in the region, and they're often blended with Malbec to add complexity. Now, while Malbec is the king of Luján de Cuyo, it's certainly not the only grape worth exploring.
Right.
You've got some real hidden gems in this region, and one that I'm particularly fond of is Bonarda.
Bonarda. Now that's a name I haven't heard much before. What's the story with this grape?
Bonarda is actually a native Italian grape that was brought to Argentina in the 19th century. And it's really taken root here. It's now one of the most widely planted red grapes in the country.
Wow, I had no idea. So how does it compare to Malbec in terms of taste?
It's definitely lighter and brighter than Malbec. Think juicy red fruits like cherry and raspberry with a touch of spice. It's got this vibrant acidity and generally lower tannins, making it a very approachable, easy drinking wine.
Sounds perfect for a summer barbecue.
Absolutely. And you know what's really interesting about Bonarda is that this incredible ability to reflect the terroir where it's grown. So even within Luján de Cuyo, you'll find Bonardas with subtle differences depending on the specific vineyard.
That's fascinating. So it's like each Bonarda tells a unique story about the place it comes from.
Exactly. And that's what I love about exploring different grape varieties. You get to see how the same region can express itself in so many different ways.
Speaking of expressing itself in different ways, what about white wines? I know Argentina is famous for its reds, but is there anything interesting happening on the white wine front in Luján de Cuyo?
There absolutely is. While reds dominate the scene, there are a few white grapes that are making a name for themselves in Luján de Cuyo. Chardonnay, for example, is becoming increasingly popular. You're seeing some really elegant Chardonnays coming out of the region with notes of citrus, stone fruit, and a lovely minerality.
Minerality. I've heard that term before, but I'm not quite sure what it means.
It's a tough one to describe. It's almost like a taste of the earth, a kind of stony, flinty quality that adds complexity and depth to the wine. You often find it in wines grown in regions with rocky soils, like some parts of Luján de Cuyo.
That makes sense. So it's like a little taste of the terroir coming through.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And of course, you can't forget about Torrontés.
Torrontés. Ah, yes, the signature white grape of Argentina. What makes it so special?
Well, firstly, it's unique to Argentina. You won't find it growing anywhere else in the world. And it's known for its incredibly aromatic, floral personality. Think fragrant white flowers like jasmine and honeysuckle, with hints of citrus and peach.
Sounds delicious and refreshing.
It is. And while most Torrontés comes from other regions like Salta, Luján de Cuyo is starting to produce some really interesting expressions of this grape. The cooler climate here seems to give the wines a little more restraint and elegance.
So you're saying there's a whole world of flavors to discover in Luján de Cuyo beyond just Malbec?
Absolutely. It's a region that's constantly evolving and pushing boundaries. And that's reflected not only in the grape varieties they're growing, but also in the wineries themselves.
Speaking of wineries, our research painted a pretty vivid picture of the bodegas in Luján de Cuyo. From historic family-run estates to modern architectural marvels, it seems like there's something for everyone.
It's true. You have this fascinating juxtaposition of old and new, traditional and cutting edge. And that's what makes it so exciting to explore.
Let's start with those traditional family-run bodegas. What are some of the names that really stood out in our research?
Well, you can't talk about Luján de Cuyo without mentioning Catena Zapata. They're practically royalty in the Argentine wine world. Founded back in 1902 by an Italian immigrant named Nicola Catena, they've been a driving force behind the region's rise to prominence.
That's incredible, over a century of winemaking tradition.
And what's remarkable is that they've managed to maintain that sense of heritage while also embracing innovation. They were one of the first wineries in Argentina to plant at high altitude back in the 1990s, and they've been pioneers in researching the different microclimates and soil types within Luján de Cuyo.
So they're not just resting on their laurels, they're constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Exactly, and that's reflected in their wines. Their flagship Malbec, the Catena Zapata, Nicolas Catena Zapata, is considered one of the greatest wines in Argentina. It's this incredibly complex, powerful wine that can age for decades.
Wow. It's amazing to think about the legacy that these families have built over generations.
It is. And Catena Zapata is just one example.
Hmm.
There are so many other family-run wineries in Luján de Cuyo that are carrying on these traditions. A Cheval Ferrer, for instance. They're known for their meticulous approach to winemaking, producing small batches of incredibly elegant wines.
I remember our sommelier source raving about a Cheval Ferrer's Malbecs. He said they have this incredible purity of fruit and a silky texture that's just irresistible.
That's exactly it. And then there's Luigi Bosca, another family-run winery that's been around for over a century. They have this incredible portfolio of wines, from everyday drinkers to special occasion bottles.
So you have these traditional bodegas that are deeply rooted in the history of Luján de Cuyo, but then there's this whole new wave of wineries that are bringing a fresh perspective to the region, right?
Absolutely. And these modern wineries are just as fascinating. They're often designed by renowned architects, and they incorporate cutting-edge technology into their winemaking processes.
That traditional approach is interesting, but I wonder if those wineries are able to keep up with modern trends in winemaking. What are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting question. The traditional bodegas certainly face challenges from these modern newcomers who aren't afraid to experiment and push the boundaries. Some might say they're shaking things up a bit too much, but I think it's a healthy tension. It keeps everyone on their toes and ultimately drives quality and innovation.
So it's like this friendly rivalry that benefits everyone.
Exactly. And it's reflected in the incredible diversity of wines coming out of Luján de Cuyo today.
Well, let's talk about some of these modern marvels. What are some of the names that jumped out at you?
One that immediately comes to mind is Salentine. They're known for their stunning winery, which is built into a hillside and features this incredible underground cellar shaped like an amphitheater.
That's fascinating. I'd love to see that. It sounds like they're really embracing the eno-tourism aspect of winemaking.
Absolutely. They want visitors to have a full sensory experience, not just tasting the wine, but also immersing themselves in the environment where it's made.
So it's about telling the whole story of the wine from the vineyard to the glass.
Exactly. And Salentine is not alone in this approach. Another winery that caught my attention is Zucardi Valle de Uco. Technically, they're located in the neighboring Uco Valley, but they have a strong presence in Luján de Cuyo as well.
I remember reading about their striking pyramid-shaped winery. It's quite a departure from the traditional style.
It is. And they're known for their innovative approach to winemaking. They use concrete eggs for fermentation, which is an ancient technique that's becoming popular again. And they have this real focus on showcasing the unique terroirs of their vineyards.
So they're blending ancient traditions with modern technology.
Precisely. And then there's Bodega Norton, another example of a winery that successfully bridged the gap between tradition and innovation. They have a long history in Luján de Cuyo, dating back to the late 19th century, but they've also embraced modern winemaking techniques,
Yeah.
and they have this beautiful state-of-the-art winery.
It seems like Luján de Cuyo is really at the forefront of Argentinian winemaking, both in terms of the quality of the wines and the innovative spirit of the producers.
I completely agree. It's a region that's buzzing with energy and creativity. And I think that's reflected in the incredible wines that are coming out of there.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the history, the terroir, the grape varieties, the wineries. But what about the future? What does the future hold for Luján de Cuyo?
That's a great question. And I think the future for Luján de Cuyo is incredibly bright. But like any wine region, they're facing challenges.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We've talked about all the amazing things happening in Luján de Cuyo, but like any wine region, they're not without their challenges.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that are on the horizon? Well, one of the biggest challenges facing wine regions around the world is climate change, and Luján de Cuyo is no exception. They're dealing with rising temperatures, water scarcity, and unpredictable weather patterns.
It's a real concern. And it's forcing winemakers to adapt and innovate. They're experimenting with drought-resistant grape varieties, implementing water conservation techniques, and even exploring ways to protect their vineyards from extreme weather events.
It sounds like they're really taking a proactive approach.
They have to.
Yeah.
It's about preserving their livelihoods and the legacy of this incredible wine region.
What's fascinating here is that it seems like these challenges are actually driving even more sustainability and innovation in Luján de Cuyo.
Absolutely. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that in the way winemakers are embracing organic and biodynamic practices. They're realizing that working in harmony with nature is not only good for the environment, but it also produces better grapes and better wine.
That reminds me of something our sommelier source said. He mentioned that he's been noticing a real shift towards freshness and elegance in Luján de Cuyo wines. He thinks it's partly due to these sustainable practices.
It makes sense. If you're treating the land with respect, it's going to show in the wines.
So it's like a virtuous cycle.
Exactly. And this focus on sustainability is also attracting a new generation of wine drinkers who are more conscious of their environmental impact.
That's a great point. People are not only looking for great wine, but they also want to know that it's produced responsibly.
Right. It's not just about what's in the bottle anymore. It's about the whole story behind the wine.
Okay, so climate change is one challenge. What other hurdles are Luján de Cuyo producers facing?
Another challenge, and this is one that affects wine regions all over the world, is competition. The global wine market is incredibly crowded these days, and everyone is vying for attention.
So how do Luján de Cuyo wines stand out in this sea of options?
Well, they have a few things going for them. First of all, the quality is undeniable. Argentinian Malbec, in particular, has become a global phenomenon, and Luján de Cuyo is considered one of the top Malbec-producing regions in the world.
So they have a reputation for excellence.
They do, and they're building on that reputation by focusing on what makes them unique. Their terroir, their history, their commitment to sustainability. They're also getting creative with their marketing, telling the story of Luján de Cuyo, and connecting with consumers on a deeper level.
They're realizing that it's not just about producing great wine anymore. It's about creating an experience.
Precisely. And that's where enotourism comes in. Luján de Cuyo has become a popular destination for wine lovers from all over the world who are eager to experience the region firsthand, visit the wineries, meet the producers, and of course, taste the wines.
It's like they're inviting people to become part of the Luján de Cuyo story.
Exactly. And that's a powerful way to build brand loyalty.
So despite the challenges, there's a sense of optimism about the future of Luján de Cuyo.
Absolutely. There's a real sense of community and collaboration among the winemakers. They're facing these challenges head on, and they're doing it together.
It's like they're all in this together, rowing the same boat towards a sustainable and successful future.
That's a great analogy. And I think it's that spirit of unity and determination that will ultimately ensure Luján de Cuyo's continued success.
So what does this all mean for our listener, who we know is eager to explore the wines of Luján de Cuyo? What's the one key takeaway?
I think the key takeaway is this. Luján de Cuyo is a region that's firing on all cylinders. They're producing exceptional wines, they're leading the way in sustainability, and they're creating unforgettable experiences for wine lovers. So if you're looking for an adventure in a glass, Luján de Cuyo is the perfect place to start.
And I think another key takeaway is to approach Luján de Cuyo with a sense of curiosity and adventure. Don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone, try new things, ask questions, and let your palate be your guide.
Exactly. There's a whole world of flavors waiting to be discovered.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into Luján de Cuyo. But before we do, I want to leave our listener with one final thought-provoking question. Now that we've explored the unique terroir of this region and the wines it produces, what other wine regions around the world might share some similarities with Luján de Cuyo? And based on those similarities, what kind of wines would you expect to find in those regions?
That's a fantastic question. It really gets you thinking about the interconnectedness of the wine world. And for our listener, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your ideas with us on social media, and let's keep this conversation going.
And until then, we encourage you to seek out some Luján de Cuyo wines and experience the magic of this incredible region for yourself. Cheers.
Cheers to that.